everyone, welcome back. Ever get that feeling like you're kind of playing a game, but you don't actually know all the rules? That's what we're diving into today.
Mm-hmm.
How do societies actually asterisk it?
Yeah.
Not just the surface stuff, but the deep down, why is this even a thing stuff?
Yeah.
So we're going deep on economic anthropology.
Okay.
Don't worry, it's way more interesting than it might sound. We've got these excerpts from this book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's blowing my mind how differently cultures throughout history have organized their whole economic systems.
I know. It's fascinating.
It's asterisk fascinating.
Yeah.
We're talking ancient hunter-gatherers all the way to, us.
It's wild. The connections, right? Like how these systems, these rules we don't even realize we're following, they shape not just our jobs.
Right.
But our whole worldview.
Totally. Like how we think even. Okay, so to even start unpacking all this, we got to ditch those simple labels, right?
Definitely.
Capitalism versus socialism, that's
Just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Those are really just two examples of what anthropologists call modes of production. Basically, it's like the DNA of a society's economic structure.
Makes sense.
And humans have tried so many different ways of organizing their economic lives.
So many. So let's hop in our time machine. Where are we even starting this journey?
Well, might as well start at the beginning, right?
Right.
Hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where every single day you eat what you find that day.
Whoa.
That's it. No stock options, no 401k,
No retirement plan.
immediate return, immediate survival.
Talk about living in the moment. You can't procrastinate with that.
No.
And no way. Okay, so then humans, we develop tools, right? We get a little fancier. What's next?
Yeah. So we start to see horticulture popping up. Smaller scale farming, simple tools, but a strong connection to the land, to family history.
So they could store a little surplus now. That must have been huge.
Game changer. But nothing compared to what agriculture brought, the invention of the plow. The text says that was asterisk.
Huge.
Huge. Larger surpluses meant people could specialize. Suddenly you have artisans, priests, warriors, even the first cities pop up.
Cities. Division of labor. This is starting to sound a little familiar.
Right.
Okay, but what about those groups that don't fit neatly into these categories? I'm thinking like pastoralists.
Yeah.
The nomads, right?
Right. But it's easy to oversimplify. Yes, they herded animals, but they often had these super interesting, symbiotic relationships with settled farmers. Think trade networks, animal products for agricultural goods.
It's so interesting how everything's connected.
It is.
Okay, so we've got hunter-gatherers, we've got our horticulturalists, we've got the agriculturalists, our pastoralists, and then things get even more complex because now we've got peasants.
So peasants are a really interesting case. They're agriculturalists, yeah, but they're also woven into a larger system. They're often paying rent on the land they work.
So it's like a mix then. Subsistence, growing for themselves, but also...
But also tied into a market exchange. Exactly.
Wow. So they're caught between these two worlds almost.
You could say that.
The traditional, and then almost like the seeds of, I don't know, capitalism.
And that brings us to a major turning point. Industrial societies. Much more complex division of labor, specialized knowledge. You see separate political and economic institutions popping up.
So that's where we see factories, wage labor, mass production. It's humanity hit fast forward.
Yeah.
From these small, interconnected groups to these massive, complicated systems. And this is where the book really got me thinking. It compares this, capitalist production to that earlier peasant model.
And the contrast is stark.
Totally.
Like night and day. Capitalist production is all about fragmentation, constant innovation, this relentless drive for profit, more. But peasant production, it's holistic, deeply connected to local communities. It's driven by need, not some bottom line.
Wow. It's like one's about maximizing output, the other's about sustaining a way of life. Which makes me think about us right now. How much of our work life is all about these abstract systems.
Totally.
Clocking in, deadlines, profits. It can feel so disconnected from those basic human needs we were talking about.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, what are we really working towards? Are we all just cogs in this giant machine? Speaking of which, the book also gets into something I think a lot of people can relate to. Bullshit jobs.
Right. That's where it gets really interesting. We have all this tech, all this understanding, and yet there's this feeling of pointlessness. So tell me more. What is this whole bullshit jobs idea?
So it's based on the work of anthropologist David Graeber, and it really seemed to resonate with a lot of people. He argues that a huge chunk of jobs in modern economies are, to be blunt, bullshit. They don't actually contribute anything meaningful.
And it's not just like those entry-level jobs. It goes way deeper, right?
Wait, he has these 5 categories of bullshit jobs, and they're everywhere. Like, you've got your flunkies whose only purpose seems to be making their boss feel important. Then there are the box tickers, just generating useless reports that no one even reads.
It's like the system wants us busy, even if that busy doesn't actually do anything useful. Kind of depressing, honestly. But to be fair, the book does present a counterargument. It mentions how some jobs, they might seem pointless at first glance.
Right.
But maybe they actually serve some hidden purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Like, take those airport staff who have to deal with those frustrated passengers, the ones who've lost their luggage.
Oh, yeah.
They're not actually fixing the root problem, which is often, let's be honest, the airline messing up.
Right.
But they're fulfilling a very real human need, that emotional support, helping people navigate a stressful situation.
That's a good point. And the book also points out work is more than just a paycheck for a lot of people, right?
Absolutely.
It can be about purpose, social connection, a reason to, get out of bed in the morning.
Totally.
Essential stuff.
Identity, belonging, feeling like you're contributing to something bigger, even if it's just shuffling digital papers around sometimes.
That's true. Work can be about so much more. But I don't know, Graeber's point still stands, doesn't it? Something feels off when so many people feel stuck in these jobs that feel meaningless. And it makes you wonder, how did we even get here? What role has technology played in all of this?
Technology.
Yeah.
Always painted as this unstoppable force for good, for progress. But anthropologists, we have a bit of a more, shall we say, nuanced view.
Because it's not as simple as new gadget, therefore progress.
Exactly. Right. It's not just about the gadgets themselves. It's about how they're embedded in our social structures, in power dynamics. The source material uses a really interesting example, the microcomputer. Remember when it first came out? Everyone was convinced we'd be living in a paperless world by now.
Yeah, that didn't quite pan out, did it? I mean, here we are recording a podcast on computers.
Exactly. The point is, technology rarely plays out exactly the way we think it will. And its impact, it runs deeper than we realize.
Yeah.
How we work, how we communicate, even how we think. It all shifts.
Which brings us to, the big question right now, AI automation. It feels like we're on the verge of another one of those big shifts, doesn't it?
It does.
How we work, how we live. And honestly, it's a little unnerving.
Absolutely. AI and automation, they bring up so many huge questions, ethical, economic.
Mm-hmm.
Will it lead to work that's actually meaningful?
Yeah.
Or will it make a lot of us obsolete? And how do we handle wealth distribution when robots are doing more and more jobs? We can't ignore these questions.
You can't. Okay, so much to unpack there. But speaking of complex systems, we kind of have to address the elephant in the room, right? Neoliberalism.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It's become such a buzzword, but it's also this force shaping, everything.
Totally.
Often in ways we don't even realize. Okay, so for those of us who haven't, read every economics textbook ever, break it down. What actually asterisk is asterisk neoliberalism?
At its core, it's really an ideology that puts free markets, deregulation front and center.
Yeah.
The idea that those market forces, they should guide basically everything.
Everything. Even things like healthcare, education.
That's the idea, yeah. Apply that market logic to, everything.
But doesn't that feel kind of, reductive? Humans are complicated. We're not just about buying and selling.
That's a common critique. And we're not just talking theory here. Neoliberalism has had a huge real-world impact, especially in the Global South.
Mm-hmm.
The source material goes into structural adjustment programs, the push for privatization,
right.
And often it led to, frankly, devastating consequences in developing countries.
So it's like this double-edged sword. Free markets, they can be great. They can drive innovation, create opportunities.
For sure.
But they can also make inequality way worse.
Absolutely.
Erode those safety nets that are supposed to be there.
Yeah.
This tension between what the market wants and what people actually need to thrive. Actually, the source mentions this idea, the double movement.
Oh, yes.
From Karl Polanyi. What's that all about?
So Polanyi, fascinating guy. He argued that there's this inherent conflict, right, between the expansion of market forces and these fundamental human values. Reciprocity, redistributions. As markets get more powerful, they start chipping away at those social bonds that hold us together, those support systems we rely on.
Like an ongoing tug of war. Market on one side, human needs on the other.
And you see this playing out everywhere today. The debates about healthcare, universal basic income.
Yeah.
They're all reactions to this idea that maybe the market doesn't always meet those basic needs.
So it's about finding some kind of balance then, right? Between the market's efficiency
And what humans actually need to thrive.
Right. And this is where anthropology comes in.
Yes, because anthropology brings this unique perspective. We study how these big systems actually play out on the ground in real communities with real people.
So it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet, it's the stories behind the numbers.
Exactly. For example, the book talks about this community in Peru, Ganadabamba. They went through this huge transformation. They went from a more traditional peasant economy to a more capitalist system focused on wage labor.
Wow, so what happened? Did they fully embrace this new system?
Well, it was messy. As villagers were pulled into wage labor, working on those coastal plantations, it shook things up. Family structures changed, new vulnerabilities emerged, and what you end up with is this blending of the two.
So even as they're drawn into this new way of doing things, they don't fully let go of the old ways.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how different economic models, they can coexist even within the same community. And these transitions are never clean cut. There's always ripple effects.
Which makes me think about another term we hear a lot these days, the precariat.
Right.
This idea that more and more people are stuck in this unstable in-between, gig work, temporary jobs. Like the lines are blurring between traditional work and this new world of like freelancing and side hustles.
It's a growing part of the workforce. And it's not just in, developing countries anymore. We're seeing it everywhere. Europe, North America. The promise of that stable job, that good paycheck, it's fading for a lot of people. And that creates so much anxiety.
Like the old rules don't apply anymore. This uncertainty, the fear, it comes up a lot in the text, especially when it talks about the human cost of these big economic shifts.
Yes, it does. The book actually paints this really poignant picture of urban Africa, where you have rapid urbanization, economic change. It's created this huge informal economy, and a lot of people are just struggling to get by.
It talks about people being forced into these like survivalist economies just to survive, which makes me wonder, how do we even begin to address these huge issues? Where do we even start?
I think a good place to begin is just acknowledging the humanity of the people caught in these systems.
Absolutely.
The text, it reminds us, behind every statistic, there's a real person with real hopes and dreams and struggles.
We can't forget that. They're not just data points, not just economic units. They're people like us trying to navigate a world that's changing really, really fast.
Exactly. And their stories, they matter.
They do. This has been so insightful, but wow, heavy stuff. It feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
We are. But that's what I love about anthropology. It just makes you want to keep asking questions, keep digging deeper.
I love that.
Challenge what we think we know, and always be open to new ways of seeing the world.
I love that. Okay, listeners, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into economic anthropology.
I know, we've covered a lot.
So much. Different ways societies organize their economies, the impact of technology, neoliberalism, all these challenges we're facing in the 21st century.
It's a lot to take in, but hopefully it's sparked some curiosity. Give you some new things to think about.
It has, for me. Be sure to come back for part 2. We're going to dig even deeper into all of this and explore how understanding these different systems, these different ways of organizing ourselves can help us build a future that's more just, more sustainable for everyone. See you then.
Welcome back to our deep dive. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of economic anthropology. Last time, remember, we traveled through time, all those different ways societies have organized their, economic lives.
To trip, right?
It asterisk is asterisk a trip, hunter-gatherers to, industrial capitalism.
Yeah.
We even touched on some, pretty heavy topics. Yeah. Neoliberalism.
Yeah.
The future of work. Big stuff.
And we ended on a kind of, a somber note, talking about the challenges people are facing, like in urban Africa,
Right.
where all those traditional ways of life are bumping up against those global economic forces.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. And it makes you think, right? Economics, It's not just these numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
It's real people, real lives being impacted.
Absolutely. Which kind of brings us back to this big question, the one that's been hanging around since we started this whole thing. So everything's changing so fast, uncertainty everywhere. How can understanding all these different economic systems, these different ways of organizing ourselves, how can that help us build a better future, a more just future?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, it's not like there's some easy answer.
Right.
But I do think anthropology gives us some good clues.
Okay, I like clues.
By studying all these different ways of doing things, past and present, we can start to, open up our minds to other possibilities.
So it's like we're expanding our options. not just stuck in one way of thinking.
Exactly. It starts with, like, questioning those assumptions we make. For example, how we talk about progress.
Okay.
Usually it's all about tech, right? Economic growth, that kind of stuff. But what if progress means something totally different depending on where you are, who you are?
Okay, yeah. Like for a hunter-gatherer, progress might be like keeping things in balance with nature, making sure everyone in the community is doing okay.
Exactly. Or for a peasant farmer, maybe progress is having secure access to their land, holding on to traditional knowledge, that feeling of, like, self-sufficiency.
So progress isn't one size fits all, it's all relative.
Totally.
And maybe, just maybe, we can learn something from these other ways of looking at things.
Absolutely. It's not about romanticizing the past.
Right.
It's not about saying, oh, this other culture has it all figured out. It's about recognizing that there are many paths to a good life.
And those paths might look really, really different from like the one we're told is the right one.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that idea, a more just, more sustainable future.
Yeah.
If we're going to actually make that happen for everyone, we have to be willing to challenge what we think we know. Think outside the box and learn from each other, from all the different ways humans have lived and thrived on this planet.
That's a big task, but it's also like exciting. Okay,
Yeah.
so where do we even start? What can we actually do? How do we take all this and like apply it to our lives?
One thing we can do, support those voices that don't always get heard,
Okay.
the people who are often left out of the conversation.
Right.
The source material, it emphasizes this. Listening to the experiences of folks in the global south, indigenous communities, anyone who's on the front lines of these economic changes.
Because they have a different perspective, right?
Exactly. On what progress really means, what a truly just and sustainable future could actually look like. Their knowledge is so valuable.
It's about making space for those voices, building connections, solidarity across different cultures, different communities.
Yes. And it's about being careful about the information we consume.
Oh, right.
We're constantly bombarded with messages, right, about economic growth, new technology, globalization.
It's a lot.
But as anthropologists, we're trained to look deeper. Question those narratives. What are the consequences? Intended, unintended? We got to think about it all.
So it's like we need healthy skepticism, not just taking everything at face value, right?
Exactly. Question everything.
Dig deeper, demand to know, like, where is this coming from?
And be aware of our own biases. We all have them. We come from different backgrounds, different experiences.
Yeah.
And that shapes how we see the world. By acknowledging that, we can start to see things from different angles, have those more, nuanced conversations, more productive conversations.
So it's about being humble, being curious, and being willing to admit when we might be wrong.
Yes. And realizing we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Climate change, inequality, all of it. These aren't just your problems or my problems. They're everyone's problems.
Global problems need global solutions.
Exactly. And those solutions, they're going to come from working together, from having empathy, from understanding that, like it or not, we're all connected.
It feels daunting, but also, I don't know, hopeful. Like if we actually tap into that human ingenuity, that creativity,
Right.
that compassion, maybe we can make things better.
I think so too. It's about taking back our agency, remembering that we are all human, we're all sharing this planet, and then working together to build something better, more just, more sustainable, more equitable for everyone.
I love that. Okay, listeners, we covered a lot in this part. Questioning assumptions, listening to those unheard voices, being critical about the information that's all around us.
So much to think about.
And remembering that, at the end of the day, we're all in this together. But before we get ahead of ourselves, there's one more crucial piece of this whole economic puzzle we need to unpack. Money.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're on the final stretch of our economic anthropology adventure, and wow, my brain is definitely full.
It's a lot to take in, right?
It is. From those ancient ways of life to, like, the global forces shaping our world today, we've really covered some ground. We have, but I think that's what makes this so fascinating, don't you think? Seeing those connections, understanding how we got here.
Totally. And like we were talking about, it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's so much potential for positive change when we start, questioning those old narratives and looking at things with fresh eyes.
Absolutely. We have more power than we think to shape the future. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves.
Right. We can't forget about our good friend money.
Yes, money.
It's the thing that makes the modern world go round, right?
It's everywhere.
But have you ever actually stopped to think about what money asterisk is asterisk? Like, really?
It's one of those things we take for granted, isn't it?
Yeah.
But when you really dig into it, it's actually a pretty strange concept. We think of it as this, like, real thing. Coins, bills, numbers on a screen. But ultimately, it's a social construct.
What do you mean?
It only has value because we all agree that it does.
Wow. It's like we're all playing this big game of make-believe.
In a way, yeah. And the rules of that game, they've changed a lot over time. The source material goes through the whole history of money, from bartering to using actual objects like gold or shells,
Right.
to those super complicated systems we have today. Credit cards, digital currencies. Wild.
Imagine trying to explain Bitcoin to, like, a medieval peasant. It just shows you how much those beliefs and values shape our systems. Oh, and the technology, too.
Huge factor.
It's changing everything about how we use and think about money. I mean, I barely use cash anymore.
Right.
It's all plastic, online transactions, who knows what's next.
Exactly. And it brings up new questions, too. Like, the text mentions the rise of mobile payments in some parts of Africa. It's actually given people access to financial services who were totally left out before.
So it's like technology can level the playing field.
It can, but it can also make those inequalities worse if we're not careful. It all depends on how we use it, who benefits.
It's not just about the tech itself, it's about the context. Who's in control?
Exactly. Which brings us right back to that big question, the one we keep coming back to. What kind of future are we trying to build? We have a choice.
We do. It's easy to feel powerless, like these systems are just too big, you know.
I get that.
But we're not just along for the ride. We have agency. Our choices matter. How we spend money, how we vote,
Absolutely.
how we show up in our communities.
All of it. Every little bit counts.
Okay, so big picture. As we wrap up this deep dive into economic anthropology, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from this?
I think it's about staying curious, staying engaged. Don't just accept the way things are. Ask those questions. Seek out different perspectives. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
I love that. There's always more to discover. So to all our listeners out there, thank you for coming on this journey with us. Keep those brains buzzing, keep asking those big questions, and never, ever stop exploring.